What if the only person who spoke your language was a stranger in the night? What if a single kind gesture, just a few quiet signs, turned a forgotten child into the center of a storm? And what if the man who stepped through the door to claim that child was the most feared name in Chicago? Grace Miller only wanted coffee in a corner where the noise in her head could cool. The diner's lights hummed. The booths were cracked. The air tasted like old toast and burnt sugar. Then she saw him, a boy with dark eyes and quick hands. Signing please, signing help, invisible to everyone, not invisible to her. She sat. She signed. His face lit up like morning after a long winter. And then the door burst open. Men in dark suits fanned out like shadows with orders. Last came the one with iron in his posture and winter in his eyes. Dominic Santoro. He knelt to the boy and looked at Grace. In that heartbeat, the room changed. So did her life. Because sometimes the loudest truths are told in silence. Grace Miller's life was quiet. Too quiet, some might say. At 32, she lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the west side of Chicago, where the radiator clanked all winter and the air conditioner rattled like loose bones in the summer. She worked as a data entry clerk in an office where nobody knew her birthday and nobody cared if she stayed late. Her boss referred to her as the quiet one. Her neighbors barely knew her name. But silence had always been part of Grace's life. Her younger brother Ben had been born profoundly deaf. Grace was only 16 when her parents asked her to learn American Sign Language so she could help raise him. She remembered late nights bent over textbooks practicing the alphabet in the mirror until her hands cramped. She remembered the way Ben's face lit up the first time she signed, "I love you." He had been her shadow, her anchor, her reason for being. And then 3 years ago, a drunk driver ran a red light. Grace held Ben's hand in the hospital until the monitors went still. She had not spoken about him since. But she never stopped signing. Every night after work, she found herself in Mickey's Diner, the only place that welcomed her silence. She'd order the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of weak coffee, and sit in the same booth near the jukebox. The waitresses learned not to ask questions. The regulars learned not to bother her. She came because the walls of her apartment were too thin and the memories too loud. Because the nightmares were stronger in the dark. Because in a city that never slept, Mickey's offered her a place to breathe. Her routine was as ordinary as it was lonely. Wake at 6, ride the L-train type numbers until her eyes blurred clock out. Return to her apartment and stare at the ceiling until the silence pressed too heavy on her chest. Only then would she walk the 3 blocks to Mickey's. Grace told herself she preferred this life. That she was safer when invisible. That grief was easier to carry when no one expected her to speak. And yet even in her isolation, kindness was second nature to her. She carried granola bars in her purse to give to the homeless near Union Station. She stopped to pet every stray cat she met on her walks. She once spent her last $20 buying groceries for the old woman who lived across the hall when she caught her weeping over an empty fridge. Still, Grace never expected her compassion to pull her into the orbit of power and danger. She had grown up middle class, the daughter of a public school teacher and a nurse. She'd never been to a country club. Never set foot in the glittering towers where the city's wealthy dined and schemed. The closest she came to power was reading about politicians in the paper she picked up free from the train station. To her, power meant men in suits she passed on the sidewalk. Wealth meant someone else's story. Danger meant crime reports on the evening news. None of it touched her life. Until the night she saw the boy. Because Grace Miller, in all her ordinariness, carried something no one else in that diner had. She carried a language most people overlooked. A language born of hands, not voices. A language of survival. And that night when a child's frantic signing went unseen by everyone else, it was Grace who moved. Grace who answered. Grace who reached across the gulf of silence and gave him a voice. She thought it was just kindness. She thought it was just instinct. But it was fate. If Grace Miller's world was made of peeling paint, late rent notices, and cold coffee, Dominic Santoro's world was built from steel glass and shadows. To the public, he was a businessman. His name appeared on the bronze plaques of construction firms, real estate holdings, and luxury hotels scattered across Chicago. If you dined at the Ritz, stayed at a boutique hotel downtown, or walked through a new development in the suburbs, odds were good that Santoro money had paved the way. But behind the gleaming veneer of respectability lay something older, something darker. In the neighborhoods where whispers carried faster than sirens, the Santoro name meant power. It meant debts that never expired, favors that came at impossible costs, and loyalty sealed not with signatures, but with blood. No one ever said his name loudly. You either muttered it in fear or never spoke it at all. Dominic himself was a paradox. At 42, he was carved from equal parts elegance and menace. His tailored suits came from Milan, his shoes from Florence, his watches from Geneva. But his eyes, icy gray, unreadable, were forged in alleys, back rooms, and battlefields of Chicago's underworld. He was the kind of man who could step into a gala ballroom and draw admiration with a single nod, then step into a smoke-filled warehouse hours later and order a punishment without blinking. Those who knew him said Dominic Santoro had two faces. The world saw the face of a polished entrepreneur. His enemies saw the predator beneath. And yet there was one place where the mask cracked. His son. Daniel Santoro was 8 years old, born into a world of privilege, yet treated like a ghost. His deafness was not what made people fear him, it was who his father was. Tutors came and went, nannies fled after weeks, and even the staff at the Santoro estate treated the boy with a kind of haunted caution. It was easier to keep distance than risk disappointing the boss. Dominic had tried. He'd hired the best specialists, spent nights fumbling through signing books, even demanded his men learn the basics. But for all his power, he could not give his son what he truly needed, a voice that the world recognized. And so Daniel grew up in silence, loved fiercely by a father who could protect him from bullets and betrayal, but not from loneliness. The Santoro estate was a fortress, perched on manicured acres behind wrought iron gates. Inside, marble floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers. Oil paintings lined the walls, their stern faces echoing centuries of legacy. The windows were triple-paned, bulletproof, tinted so dark they swallowed sunlight. Guards patrolled day and night, their movements as sharp as military drills. It was a palace, yes, but it was also a prison. Dominic ruled from here. Meetings with lieutenants in the oak-paneled study. Phone calls that shifted fortunes from the leather chair behind his mahogany desk. Deals made over imported scotch while the city's skyline glittered in the distance. Every decision he made rippled outward, touching lives of thousands, construction workers, city officials, street hustlers, rival families. To some, he was a benefactor. To others, a nightmare. But to everyone, he was inevitable. Grace Miller, sipping burnt coffee in a tired diner, belonged to a world where Dominic Santoro was nothing more than a headline or a whispered rumor. She didn't know the weight his name carried. She didn't know the kind of man who could clear a room with one glance. But she would. Because the night she signed to his son, she did more than offer kindness. She broke through the invisible wall that separated Daniel from the rest of the world. And Dominic Santoro, who had built an empire on silence, control, and fear, suddenly found himself staring at the one woman his son chose to trust. It was a collision of worlds, the ordinary and the untouchable, the fragile and the feared. And nothing in Chicago would ever be the same. The bell over the diner door gave one last desperate jingle before it snapped off the hook and clattered to the floor. 6 men in dark suits spread across the cracked linoleum like wolves claiming territory. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks clattered onto plates. Even the hiss of the griddle seemed to falter. The air grew so still that Grace could hear her own heartbeat. And then he came. Dominic Santoro. He was taller than she imagined, broad-shouldered, his presence bending the space around him. His shoes clicked across the tiles with measured precision. The room seemed to shrink with every step he took. He scanned the diner eyes, sharp as winter steel, until they found the corner booth where Daniel sat with Grace. The child's small hand clutched hers, refusing to let go. Relief flashed in Dominic's eyes, swift, raw, almost human. But when his gaze lifted to Grace, it hardened again, cold and calculating. He knelt beside Daniel, his massive frame folding with surprising gentleness. He cupped the boy's face, his voice a low rasp laced with an Italian lilt. "There you are, figlio mio. You frightened me." Daniel's hands moved rapidly, a storm of signs Grace struggled to follow. The boy pointed to her, beaming with pride. His little fingers spelled out words of joy. "She understands me. She talks to me." Dominic's head turned, his gray eyes snapping to Grace like a spotlight. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You!" His voice carried the weight of command. "Who are you? And how do you know his language?" Grace's throat went dry. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear back into her small, safe anonymity. But Daniel's grip anchored her. His eyes shone with trust she could not betray. "I'm Grace Miller," she whispered. "I learned sign language from my brother." Her voice cracked on the last word. "He's gone now, but I never forgot." Dominic repeated her name slowly, as though tasting it. Grace Miller. His men shifted silently, closing off the exits. No one in the diner moved. "You signed to him," Dominic said quietly. "Not a question. A verdict." Grace nodded, her pulse hammering. He needed someone. I couldn't just ignore him. Something flickered across Dominic's face, too quick to name. Relief, suspicion, gratitude. Whatever it was, it passed, leaving the granite mask in its place. "Everyone out," Dominic said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command carried the force of a gunshot. Within seconds, customers scrambled. Dolores, the waitress, dropped her coffee pot with a crash, and the diner emptied until only Grace, Daniel, Dominic, and 6 armed men remained. Grace's legs trembled, but she stayed seated. Daniel leaned against her, refusing to release her hand. Dominic slid into the booth across from her. His presence filled the space, the scent of expensive cologne and something darker, gun oil, maybe settling around them. "My son," he said, voice low, "trusts no one. Not tutors, not guards, not even the family that works under this roof. He trusts only me. Until tonight." His eyes burned into hers. "Until you." Grace swallowed hard. "I didn't plan this, he was alone, afraid. And now he looks at you as if you hung the moon." Dominic's jaw clenched. "That makes you valuable." Her stomach turned. "I don't want to be valuable. I want to go home." "No." Dominic's tone was velvet over steel. "From the moment you spoke to him in his language, your world stopped being yours alone. It became his. Which means he leaned closer, his gaze unyielding. It became mine." Grace's chest tightened. "You can't just keep me here. That's kidnapping." "I don't kidnap," Dominic said calmly, though his men's silent watch contradicted him. "I protect what matters. My son matters, and if you are the only person who can give him a voice, then you matter too, whether you like it or not." Daniel tugged at her hand, signing desperately. His small fingers spelled stay. Grace's throat closed. She was a nobody. A quiet woman with a dead brother, a dead-end job, and nothing to her name but grief. And yet here she was, held in the sights of a man whose empire bent a city to its knees because she had offered kindness to his child. Her life would never be the same. The Santoro estate loomed like a cathedral to power. By the time the black SUV carried Grace through its iron gates, she had stopped pretending she was free to leave. Daniel sat against his father's side, clutching Grace's hand, even as his eyes fluttered with exhaustion. The mansion's interior glowed with cold opulence, marble floors polished to a mirror, a chandelier dripping with crystal oil portraits of unsmiling ancestors. To Grace, it felt less like a home than a museum curated by fear. Dominic dismissed his men with a flick of his wrist and led her into the study, a cavern of dark wood leather and silence. He poured himself a drink, the ice clinking like a warning bell. Grace sat stiffly, her palms sweating against the velvet of the chair. "Why you?" Dominic asked, at last voice calm but laced with something dangerous. "Why is my son suddenly laughing, signing trusting when 8 years of specialists couldn't reach him?" Grace hesitated. "Maybe because I didn't treat him like a problem to be solved. I just listened." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "You say that as if you've lived this before." Her breath caught. "My brother, he was deaf. I grew up in that world." Something shifted in Dominic's face. He stood, walked to a drawer in his massive desk, and pulled out a small object. He set it down between them, a silver locket worn but polished. Grace froze. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. She knew that locket. She knew it because her mother had worn the twin of it every day of her life. Her voice broke. "Where did you get this?" Dominic's eyes studied her with unnerving intensity. "It belonged to my wife, Daniel's mother. She died when he was a baby." Grace reached forward with trembling fingers, brushing the locket as if it might burn. She flipped it open. Inside was a photograph of a young woman with soft features and dark hair, and hanging at her throat in the picture was a second locket, the exact one Grace's mother had worn. Her pulse roared in her ears. "That's impossible," she whispered. "That's my aunt, my mother's younger sister." Silence slammed into the room like a verdict. Dominic's expression darkened, then softened, with something that looked disturbingly like recognition. He sank into the chair opposite her, his voice a low growl. "You're telling me my late wife's sister was your mother?" Grace's throat burned. "Which means—" She couldn't finish. Dominic did. "Which means Daniel is not only my son, he is your blood." The room tilted. Grace clutched the arms of her chair to steady herself. "That makes him my nephew." Daniel curled in the corner chair, looked between them confused but alert. His small hands moved in hesitant signs. "What's wrong?" Grace couldn't answer. Her chest heaved as memories crashed through her family stories about her Aunt Elena, who had married a man the family disapproved of, then disappeared into another life. Letters that had stopped coming. Her mother's tears. The silence that settled over that branch of the family like a locked door. And now the door had opened. Dominic rubbed his temples as if the weight of this truth pressed harder than any rival family. All these years, I thought she was gone, cut off from everyone she knew. And now you walk into a diner, speak my son's language, and tell me you carry her blood. Grace whispered, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." His gaze was sharp, dissecting, as if searching for deception. Finally, he exhaled slowly. "You're telling the truth. I can see it." Daniel tugged on Grace's sleeve, signing with urgency. "Family. Your family." Her vision blurred with tears. She nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. We're family." The boy launched himself into her arms, clinging to her neck as though she'd been the missing piece all along. Grace held him tightly, sobs shaking her chest. Dominic rose, pacing the length of the study like a man untethered. "This changes everything," he muttered. "The enemies who wanted to use you, the men who would have taken you to break me, they won't stop. And now they'll see two weaknesses, not one." Grace pulled back, still cradling Daniel's face in her hands. "He's not a weakness. He's a child, a beautiful child who deserves to be loved without fear." Dominic turned his eyes storm gray, his voice breaking despite himself. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't killed, bled, built an empire of stone just to keep him alive another day?" The silence that followed felt heavy, alive, dangerous. For the first time, Grace saw not the mafia boss, not the ruthless businessman, but a father. A man cracking beneath the weight of love and fear. and she saw the truth. They were bound now, all three of them. Not by choice, not by power, but by blood. 3 weeks passed inside the Santoro estate, and Grace's life became unrecognizable. Every morning, Daniel waited outside her door, bright-eyed, his hands eager to share new signs. They invented stories with their fingers, knights, dragons, and silly cats' tales that made him laugh until his shoulders shook. For the first time, the mansion's cold halls carried the sound of joy. And for the first time, Dominic Santoro allowed himself to hope. But the world outside those gates had not forgotten. Vincent Torino had been circling for months, waiting for a weakness. Now he had two, a child and a woman. Rumors spread through the city's underworld. Dominic's son had bonded with an outsider, and worse, she was blood. To enemies, it wasn't a miracle. It was a weapon. Grace overheard the whispers one night as she crossed the marble corridor. Dominic's lieutenants spoke in hushed tones outside his study. "Torino's moving pieces, boss. He's asking questions about the girl." Grace's stomach twisted. She pressed her palm against the wall, listening harder. "If he can't get the boy, he'll go for her," another said. "She's not guarded the same way. She's the soft target." The study door creaked open. Dominic's voice cut through the dark like a blade. "No one touches her. No one touches my family." The word hit Grace like a thunderclap. Family. She wanted to believe it. But shadows move faster than words. 2 days later, she convinced Dominic to let Daniel see the park. Just an hour, she argued, with guards with precautions. He needs to be a child, not a prisoner. Reluctantly, Dominic agreed. The sun was gentle that afternoon, the pond alive with ducks. Daniel scattered breadcrumbs with delight, laughing when the ducks waddled close. Grace sat beside him, her heart swelling at the sight. For once, he wasn't invisible. But then she noticed it, the jogger circling too often, the maintenance man lingering by the same trash can, the van parked across the street, windows too dark. "Marco," she whispered to the guard, "something's wrong." The first gunshot cracked the air before he could answer. Chaos erupted. Masked men poured from the van, rifles flashing. Daniel froze, paralyzed by terror. Grace lunged, tackling him behind a tree as bullets tore through the bench where he'd stood seconds before. "I've got you, baby," she whispered, pressing him against her chest. "I won't let them take you." But they did. She shielded him as long as she could until rough hands yanked him away and a rifle butt struck her ribs. She crumpled to the ground, her vision swimming. Daniel's terrified eyes locked on hers as he signed the only word he could manage: help. By the time Dominic reached the hospital where Grace awoke hours later, his empire was already burning. "They took him." Grace gasped, tears streaking her face. I threw myself in front of him, but they took him." Dominic's eyes were hollow, bloodshot, his hands trembling as he touched her cheek. "You bled for my son," he whispered. "You risked everything. But Torino thinks this is a victory." His voice dropped to steel. "He's wrong. This is war." Smoke already curled into the night sky from 3 separate Torino warehouses. Retaliation had begun. But Grace couldn't sit still. Bandages wrapped tight around her ribs, she slipped past Dominic's guards and hunted the docks where Daniel had once said he dreamed of hiding among boats. She found him. The warehouse reeked of oil and rust. Daniel was bound, terrified, his hands trembling, as he signed nonsense into the empty air. Grace pressed herself against the shadows, caught his eye, and signed the one phrase she knew he needed: Little Wolf. "I'm here." He steadied. He signed back 3 men, 2 guns, 1 key. Her heart nearly broke at his bravery. But then a voice slithered from behind her. Well, the babysitter. Vincent Torino, scarred, smirking, gun raised. Grace's pulse thundered, but she stood tall. "Let him go. Your fight is with Dominic, not an 8-year-old. Vincent chuckled. "Oh, but the boy is everything. He's the heir, the legacy, and now the soft spot. You, darling, are just a bonus." Engines rumbled outside. Snipers cracked shots into the air. Dominic had arrived. Walls exploded inward. His men stormed the warehouse, precise, merciless. Dominic himself entered through the smoke dressed not as a businessman, but as a soldier, eyes ablaze. "Vincent," he roared, "you took my son." Grace seized the moment. She drove her elbow into Vincent's ribs, dove for Daniel, and wrapped herself around him as bullets screamed across the room. Splinters rained, crates shattered, but she shielded him with her body, whispering, "I've got you, baby! I've got you!" Dominic moved like death itself, his rifle spitting fire. Vincent's men fell one by one until only Vincent remained cornered, snarling. "You think you scare me?" Vincent spat, gun wavering toward Grace. Dominic lowered his own weapon, stepping into the open. "You won't touch her! You won't touch my son! This ends now!" Vincent sneered, raised his gun. And Dominic was faster. One precise shot. Vincent fell. Silence followed, broken only by Daniel's sobs as he clung to Grace. Dominic dropped his weapon and fell to his knees beside them, pulling them both into his arms. "You could have died," he whispered hoarsely to Grace. "You shielded him with your body." She met his eyes, tears streaming. "So did you. You shielded us both." And for the first time, the feared Dominic Santoro broke. His gray eyes, softened voice cracking as he looked at his son and then at Grace. "You gave him something I never could. You gave him a voice. You gave us family." Daniel's small hands trembled, but he signed with perfect clarity, "Mom, Dad, family." The word mom hit Grace like a prayer. Dominic's hand closed over hers. From this moment forward, he swore, "No one touches you. You're under my name, under my protection. You are mine. You are ours." The fortress had cracked. The mafia boss had fallen, and in the ruins of violence, a family was born. The Russo estate had never been so quiet, not with fear, not with silence, but with peace. 3 days after the warehouse battle, Daniel played in the garden, showing one of the younger guards how to sign "thank you." The boy's laughter floated through the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Grace sat by the library window, ribs still aching beneath her bandages, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. She watched Daniel chasing butterflies across the manicured grass, his hands alive with joy. Dominic stepped into the room, not in a tailored suit, but in dark jeans and a simple sweater. For the first time, he looked less like a king on a throne and more like a man, tired, flawed human. His gray eyes softened as he followed her gaze to his son. "He's different now," Grace said quietly. "He's free now," Dominic corrected. "Because of you." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "Because of family. Yours and mine." Dominic moved closer, lowering himself into the chair across from her. "Stay," he said simply. "Not as his tutor, not as my responsibility. Stay as family. Be his mother. Be my wife. Be the heart of this house." Grace's chest tightened. Through the window, she saw Daniel stop his game and glance toward them, his small hands lifting to sign a single word: "Mom." Tears blurred her vision. She looked at Dominic, then back at the boy who had found her in the quiet of a diner, who had pulled her into this dangerous, impossible world. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll stay." Dominic's hand closed over hers, strong and warm. For the first time in his life, he exhaled not as a boss, not as a ruler, but as a man at peace. Daniel burst into the room, eyes bright, and signed the words that bound them all together: Mom, Dad, family. And for a moment, the mansion was not a fortress, not a throne, not a cage. It was a home. But here's the question, dear listener. Is family written in blood? Or is it chosen in love?